Okay, so now we'll just talk about kind of creating the visualization that we need. Fairly straightforward. What we're looking at now is just the surface on top view with the model. Again, the speculation on how you're going to kind of cover this space is completely up to you, and should take some time to plan. I would use as a certain kind of design constraint of the site itself as an image to help you kind of do some of that planning. I can always hide that for now though, and I want to just talk about the lighting setup. Well, let's observe real quick. I want to just kind of to be able to match the shadows. I'm going to like notice the direction that the shadows are going in. So looking at any building, I see, okay, this general angle. See the shadows are being pushed forward this way. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. I'll kind of turn this off for a second, and have some lights set up. And I have this model on a surface. So if I go to render, this is actually a helpful tool to just to quickly discover, well, which directions are your shadows working. So I already set up the lights. If we go to perspective view, right, and just show you the lights. Okay, so there's a few lights that are working here. I think when we looked at this top view, and we're looking over here, looking in the panels over here, the lights that I've set up. Okay, I've got spotlight. That's actually turned off. That's not even being used for this. It was too much. It washed my my shadow out too much. I wanted just a little bit more dramatic shadow, but actually this one isn't bad either. So it's just a decision I made. Now, I had it set up originally. The other one is a rectangle light. So if you look up this guy, this is just kind of helping me. It's at 10. It's just kind of helping me create a general light across the entire image. And then the spotlight is really potent. The point light, and lights are added, guys, always in Rhino at least, under render tools. There's these lights. So the spotlight, the point light, and the rectangle is what I use. The floodlight's good. The directional light, it creates a cone of light, and it's just too dramatic for what I was trying to do here. Okay, so so this is the general layout for the lights, and I wanted to position them, noticing how remember in the image the shadows were being kind of pushed up into the left slightly, and that's what's happening here. Well, to achieve that, if you notice when I drag the spotlight around, that's gonna. So I was just trying to emulate that shadow condition. So by positioning it so I do that in perspective view. You can just drag it with the gumball. I can actually hide that light. It's not even being used. And then this one is just an overall light that's just kind of washing out things, bringing in a little bit more light to the scene. If I go to render settings, let's take a look at my render settings. I do have the skylight on. I know, if the skylight's not on, it was too what happened is that it generates too heavy of a shadow, and my ground plane gets gray, and I need a white ground plane because I need to be able to use a layer mode in Photoshop to called multiply to knock out the background. Why? Because I couldn't figure out how in Rhino with Rhino renderer how to generate a shadow without rendering the surface that the shadow is falling on. You can do that in V-Ray. It's called a shadow wrapper, I believe. It's a way you can actually render out the shadow without the surface. In this case, I developed this workaround is just actually no problem. We'll use a skylight that gives me a white background. I still have my shadow information. And then in Photoshop, we can use a layer adjustment, the layer blend mode to knock out the white. So it's simple enough. I'll describe that next. So here we are. I like this. I like the shadows. The only thing that's really missing in this scene is the perspectival view. So I played with this a little bit. If if you look, this is the actual view that I saved. Okay, and what it is if I go to perspective, it's 2-point perspective. So I applied that 2-point perspective again. So let me backtrack. We'll go here. Let me look top, reset that top view. Okay, and then right, just to backtrack, I'm in top view. I'm gonna go 2-point perspective and zoom in. Notice how that already gives me a certain kind of like dynamic quality, right? I zoomed in. I haven't tilted the camera. I'm just zooming in. I'm not tilting with my mouse. Okay, this works. This to me has that kind of quality that we were looking at in Stop City, of this kind of this height. Okay, so this is how I achieve that dynamic kind of quality here. Okay, the same technique we used with the first drawing we did. Now let me go to the official version here. I have saved it, and then I can actually right away, if I like, this is I'm not getting my shadows. Let's see if the ray traced. Yeah, so sometimes it's funny, the rendered mode doesn't show the shadows, so I'll go to ray trace just to see the shadows. It's like, okay. And once I like this, okay, then I start to render these things out, these elements. And the first thing I render out is just this. I'll render this. So I'll talk about render settings again real quick. I'll go to render settings here. Transparent background. It doesn't matter because I'm on a ground plane. 360 environment. That's good. Skylights, default intensity. Kind of the key here is the viewport. Kind of like I use, in this case, viewport. If you need a really higher res, you have to bump that up. DPI is just 150 here, and final quality. This took to render out the shadows. It took just a few seconds. I don't know. So you can always do render preview before, just to see generally what it's going to look like. And see the shadow, how the shadows work. I'm really using this render out as really the primarily as the shadows. Okay. So that's what the shadows will look like. Okay, so that's fine. Okay, that's good. So when I actually do the official render, I would render it out as a TIFF. I would save it as a TIFF file. Okay. The other thing that's kind of worth mentioning is I added a material onto the surface of the, let's see, it's my rhinos. Yeah, go back to shaded. It's a plastic. It's plastic. It's a plastic material. It gives it that really shiny thing. I was just curious with the reflectivity how that would work. And I noticed when I did that, if I show the image, let me hide the surface. The picture itself becomes a surface, and it actually will pick up the reflections. This really surprised me, the picture, the image here. So you can use this as a rendering background. So now if I do render preview, let's see what happens. Yeah. So this kind of struck me as somewhat interesting. I was like, wow, okay, so I'm getting the reflection. This is actually fairly impressive to me, and it's fairly fast. I'm getting the reflections from the ground up onto this building. Okay, so I was like, okay, well, that's cool, but then do I have to just cut out this whole thing because it's all a part of the background? Well, I've got a workaround for that, and I can describe that in another video. But so I did render this one out too. So I had this. Okay, so I wanted to see if I can get those reflections. If I go back to that's what you're seeing here, these reflections. Okay, so I think that's all you need to know. You're going to render that. You're going to render the shadows out. You're going to render the some kind of base. If you go back here, if it's not using the shadows, I would almost hide. I would, just in case I needed it, I would just render this too without the shadows, in case I need a base like a base. In this case, I really didn't need one, but I can just render this as a standalone without a ground plane in case I need like some kind of just base opaque material as a layer in Photoshop. So I would then go ahead and render that out and save that. Save that as a PNG so that you have the translucent backgrounds. The thing that's lost here, that's why I probably didn't do it, is when you don't have a ground, there's no reflectivity here, so it just kind of solid. It's just a static kind of solid. That's going to be fine in most cases. The reflection thing was more of an experiment for me. So I'm going to have those layers, right? And then the next video I'll talk about how I work with those layers in Photoshop. So I'll bring those into Photoshop and then show you how that works. We'll see you in the next video.